Over the next several years, we're going to see significant changes in Bellingham's waterfront. The vision for this area is a new city neighborhood with homes, shops, offices, light industry, along with parks and promenades for the public, healthy shoreline habitat along Bellingham Bay, and plans for a new marina in GP's wastewater treatment lagoon. The Port of Bellingham and the City of Bellingham have come together to redevelop 137 waterfront acres that the port acquired from Georgia Pacific West Incorporated. It's an exciting new era for our community's waterfront. Please join me during the next half hour as we take a look at how this tremendous opportunity came to be and how it's been encouraged by state and local agencies and community leaders for the benefit of all who live and work here. People have been living around what we now call Bellingham Bay for at least 5,000 years, and probably much, much longer. The Lummies and other tribes traditionally used this area for fishing during the summer and fall. By 1853, the first European Americans had settled here and built a lumber mill at the falls near the mouth of Whatcom Creek, beginning an unbroken chain of industrial use like pulp and lumber mills, chemical plants, shipbuilding, and even landfills on the waterfront. Mark Osmondson is Bellingham's former mayor and is a lifelong Bellingham resident.
I had the good fortune to grow up in Bellingham and lived on Eldridge Avenue, overlooking Bellingham Bay, and playing on the bank and running down to the railroad tracks when the trains went by and stuff. That was the fun part. The other side of things were, I remember every single day, all day long, when the garbage trucks would just back up to the bay and unload their garbage, and the bulldozers would push it out into the bay, and they'd cover it up with a little bit of dirt. There'd be 10,000 seagulls flying in the air all the time. And of course, the pulp mill itself, while its operation was a real important economic part of the community, at times had a very distinctive aroma that gave downtown Bellingham sort of a unique, what is the word, bouquet.
Today, natural resource jobs are mostly gone. Most mills and other natural resource-based industries around Bellingham are also gone. Our community is faced with the challenge of finding innovative waterfront uses and meaningful ways for the public to interact with the bay. Like many waterfront communities, our industrial past influences our future potential. Scott Walker is a Port of Bellingham commissioner. He's lived and worked in Whatcom County for more than 20 years.
You know, it's hard to imagine that at one time all of this property behind me and where we're standing on the old GP site was once underwater. But over the last 150 years, this property's been filled. It's been used for a number of different things, starting off with the shipping of coal, to paper production, to what you see behind us, where they're loading rock coming in from Lummi Island. That was originally a site of a bulk distribution center for Chevron. All of these different uses over the many years have resulted in contamination of one sort or another. In those days, remember that the environmental regulations were not what they are today.
150 years of industrial activity on Bellingham's waterfront left behind an accumulation of toxic contaminants requiring a series of expensive environmental cleanups. The property has severe limitations for possible use long into the future if we leave it contaminated. Most of the contamination was released in the 1960s, before more stringent environmental regulations became the norm. Much of it came from a chemical plant built by Georgia Pacific to bleach wood pulp. This process released over 27,000 pounds of mercury and other toxic compounds directly into Bellingham Bay. In the 1970s, new environmental regulations, like the Clean Water Act, prevented GP from continuing to release contaminants directly into the bay. So the company built a 38-acre wastewater treatment lagoon to control chemical releases. You can appreciate this lagoon much better from the air. It's a large area. But Georgia Pacific wasn't the only business contributing to the industrial waste buildup in Puget Sound. In fact, the shoreline from the south end at Olympia all the way north to Bellingham and west to Port Angeles is dotted with abandoned industrial sites contaminated from heavy industrial practices. Cleaning up this historic contamination is complicated by high costs, concerns about environmental liability, loss of fish and wildlife habitat, ongoing pollution sources, and regulatory constraints. In 1994, a group of federal and state agencies began a series of meetings to discuss the cleanup of contaminated sediments in Washington's waters. The group concluded that they needed a pilot project to demonstrate to the public and others that a cleanup of an urban bay on Puget Sound was, in fact, doable. Now, the Port of Bellingham and the City of Bellingham saw this pilot project as an opportunity to address the historic contamination on Bellingham's waterfront. And in June 1996, Bellingham Bay was selected for this cooperative effort called the Bellingham Bay Pilot Project. Lucy McInerney is a site manager for the Department of Ecology and co-manager of the Bellingham Bay Pilot Project.
They lobbied very heavily to have this pilot project occur in Bellingham Bay. So with funding from the Department of Ecology, we set about the tasks of identifying all the key stakeholders, bringing those folks together, and going through the whole process of establishing a mission statement, goals, objectives. And the main goal of this was to expedite sediment cleanups in conjunction with source control and habitat restoration.
12 different contaminated sites around Bellingham's waterfront were investigated. The largest site is the Whatcom Waterway, which includes mercury contamination released from GP. Chip Hillerides is general manager of Georgia Pacific's tissue plant.
The mill site here at its height had 1,200 employees. It was a complex pulp, paper, and chemical facility, numerous operations, pulp mill. There was a lignin plant, there was an alcohol plant, there was a chlor-alkali facility, and so it was a very complex integrated facility, a lot of activities going on. And Georgia Pacific obviously realized we had some environmental responsibilities here in the 90s, and as part of that process with ecology, we were approached by both the port and the city about trying to undertake an innovative way of planning for the cleanup.
In the late 1990s, in collaboration with the Bellingham Bay Pilot Project, the Washington State Department of Ecology began developing a strategy to clean up the mercury and other contaminants alongside Georgia Pacific's ongoing pulp and paper operations. And then something quite unexpected happened.
Late 2000, the West Coast energy crisis swept through the West Coast and impacted us. We were a user of market energy, and market prices started fluctuating wildly in 2000. We actually shut down the whole mill for a couple of days that summer of 2000 in response to that. And as we headed into the fall, power prices continued to climb. They were at 10 times normal levels and were predicted to go up to as much as 100 times normal. And so that drove us to shut down the plant in December, and we essentially never got it started back up.
When the Georgia Pacific mill shut down their pulping operation, it clearly had a big impact on the community.
Mike Stoner is the Port of Bellingham's environmental director and co-manager with the State Department of Ecology of the Bellingham Bay Pilot Project.
The port and the city jumped into that whole issue. What we absolutely wanted to avoid was a circumstance where we had major industry leaving our waterfront and nothing to backfill.
The Port of Bellingham and the city launched an intensive planning effort to take a fresh and independent look at the future of Bellingham's marine waterfront. A dozen members were selected to lead the community in one of the most ambitious and extensive public planning processes ever undertaken in Bellingham.
The port and the city got together and supported a community visioning project, the Waterfront Futures Group project, and the port put in $250,000, the city put in a matching share, so we had a $500,000 project to go through a visioning effort.
The Planning Commission's meetings on the zoning in this area are September 1 and September 8th. We've sent out
The Waterfront Futures Group led an 18-month intensive effort analyzing the future of Bellingham's entire 11-mile waterfront. The group examined communities all over the world for examples of thriving waterfronts. Throughout the public process, the community spoke strongly in favor of a new waterfront where most of the traditional heavy industry would be replaced with homes, businesses, light industry, and public parks and promenades. The Waterfront Futures Group's most ambitious recommendations came from its ideas about the 137-acre site of Georgia Pacific. The size of this property relative to the Bellingham community is difficult to comprehend. The property is larger than Western Washington University's main campus. It's larger than all of downtown Bellingham. In fact, if you can imagine the size of one football field, and then imagine the size of 125 football fields, that's the amount of land that we're talking about.
Just to give you something to think on, these are not meant to be specific proposals, but just examples of what these various things might be.
The community said it was in favor of the area becoming a mixed-use neighborhood with commercial and residential development. Redeveloping the property to meet the community's vision presented challenges and opportunities. Many people pointed to the soon-to-be vacant GP property as an area that could help ease growth pressures. It also presented an incredible opportunity to reclaim our downtown waterfront for today's community and for generations to come. Al Race worked at GP for 28 years until he was laid off in 2000.
Is going to be really valuable in the near future as far as being able to utilize it. There's lots of little sections that they can fix up and make different things out of.
Despite the community's new vision for the GP waterfront, redeveloping the property to meet the community's vision was far from certain. First, the property was still owned by Georgia Pacific. Second, buying and then cleaning up the property in order to meet expectations was prohibitively expensive. Lydia Bennett co-chaired the Waterfront Futures Group and is now the Port of Bellingham's real estate director. She also owned her own commercial property management company, so she understands the problems associated with cleaning up and selling contaminated industrial property.
Because of the level of hazardous waste, this absolutely could not happen privately.
When GP closed down much of its operations, it was legally required to clean up the property to meet industrial standards. But industrial standards preclude the property from being used for anything other than another industrial use. And the community clearly demonstrated an interest in mixed use for the property. If GP cleaned it up as legally required, the land could stand fenced and vacant, creating a community eyesore unusable for commercial, residential, or park uses for decades or longer.
We were 18 months into the process when the Port of Bellingham made overtures and ultimately made the decision to acquire the GP site.
Jim Darling is the executive director of the Port of Bellingham.
Right after the project was completed, at least the visioning portion of it, the port was in a position to acquire the real estate from Georgia Pacific.
And when that announcement was made, it was very clear to everyone on Waterfront Futures that that was the only way that this was going to happen in an I don't want to say expeditious because nothing's going to be fast, but in a progressive manner.
However, for a project of this magnitude, other committed public partners were needed to share in the costs. In addition to its partnership with the City of Bellingham, this commitment was made by the State Department of Ecology.
We developed a set of estimated cleanup costs for a very aggressive cleanup that will allow us to safely reuse this industrial site in a way that would meet the community vision. And the cost estimate for that is something on the order of $75 to $85 million. Now that's more than the Port of Bellingham or the community budget allows. And so we went to the Department of Ecology again and talked to them about the possibility of helping us with grant funding. And they liked what we were doing because it is it does provide much more cleanup. It provides cleanup that allows us to restore habitat on the waterfront. It allows us to provide more public access to a clean waterfront and to redevelop it for other commercial purposes, including university expansion down to the waterfront. So the cleanup cost of $75 to $85 million is our estimate, but the Department of Ecology has agreed to help co-fund that with grants, with 50% matching grants. And that's going to help us be able to accomplish this major project over the years.
With the strong support of the community and other public agencies, the port acquired 137 acres of waterfront property from Georgia Pacific in January 2005. GP agreed to give the port the property at no cost. Georgia Pacific also agreed to purchase a $5 million environmental insurance policy, protecting the port against any unexpected cleanup costs, and undertake about $6 million in demolition work on the property. The city has agreed to pay for streets, water, sewer, and development of public parks and trails. The port will pay for the environmental cleanup on the land and in the water, as well as marine infrastructure such as docks and bulkheads. The Department of Ecology has pledged to provide 1/2 of the cleanup costs. The acquisition of the Georgia Pacific property is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform Bellingham into a true waterfront city with increased public access to the bay and a vast new area of the city where people will live, work, and play.
We're looking at really changing this waterfront into a very vibrant part of our community, and what's fun about it is that it's starting to happen right now.
And we've always talked about this as a century decision and a century project, because in the long term it'll make the difference how this community looks in 20, 50, 100 years.
When I really thought about it, I don't think there'll be anything I'll do in my career that'll serve the interest of the public more than this.
We're working very carefully to make sure that we have a sound plan that assures citizen access to the waterfront, new beaches and natural areas, real job production, and things that will make this just a great future for Bellingham.
Even though the risk is high, the opportunities are greater.
For more information about efforts to revitalize Bellingham's waterfront, visit www.newwhatcom.org.